Hi everyone, I'm Kimberly Truler, and welcome to the Style Essentials Conversations, a series where I speak to other experts about iconic films that also feature influential costume design.
You look lovely.
Thank you.
Today we'll be talking about two films from costume designer Orry-Kelly. Orry-Kelly is one of the few head costume designers from the golden age of Hollywood who was not born in America. He was Australian and spent his early years in the small seaside town of Kiama, where his father was a tailor. Even as a child, Orry loved the glamour of the theater, so when he was old enough, he moved to Sydney to try his hand at acting. His aspiration to act brought him to New York City in 1921, but it was his gift for design that helped pay the bills. While trying to make it on Broadway, he began making hand-painted shawls and ties. His salesman was his best friend and roommate, a young British expatriate named Archibald Leach. The ties were even signed Kelly Leach. Of course, we now know him better as Cary Grant. Orry-Kelly quickly discovered that his design talent would take him much further in the theater than his acting. He first tried his hand at set decoration, but he really started to make a name for himself as a costume designer, dressing some of the greats on Broadway, including Ethel Barrymore and a young Katharine Hepburn. In 1931, both Kelly and Grant made their way west to Hollywood. Cary was successful first, signing a contract with Paramount and being baptized with his new name. Orry continued to prove himself through various jobs, including designing for Fanchon and Marco prologues, major productions shown before movies at theaters in Los Angeles. It was Grant's agent who took him to see someone at Warner Brothers, and 42 days later, he had a job. Orry-Kelly would soon become their head of costume design and remain at the studio for 11 years. Other studios came calling as well. Orry-Kelly won 3 Oscars in his nearly 40 years in Hollywood, 2 during his time at MGM, 1 as part of the team that designed An American in Paris, and 1 on his own with Les Girls. A 3rd Oscar came at 20th Century Fox for Some Like It Hot. Incredibly, Orry-Kelly did not win a single Oscar during his time at Warner Brothers. This is hard to comprehend because his work helped define so much of that studio style voice, particularly in the 1940s. Today, we will discuss 2 films, both from 1942, Now Voyager and Casablanca. Paul Henreid is the lead in both of these movies, so who better to talk to than his lovely daughter, Monika Henreid. A talented filmmaker in her own right, Monika is currently working on a documentary to share the story of her father's incredible life. Welcome to our conversation.
Jerry, don't let's ask for the moon. We have the stars.
What's interesting to me and what so few people know, even cinephiles, is that Now Voyager and Casablanca both came out so close to one another in the same year, 1942. Now Voyager came out first in October. So of course that makes me imagine what the Warner Brothers lot was like at that time. What was it like for the actors on the lot?
Actually, the end of Now Voyager was being shot when Casablanca was starting. So for my father and for Claude Rains both, who both, by the way, had flus at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Actually practically walked out one soundstage across an alley into the next soundstage, and they walked directly from Now Voyager into Casablanca. This was a time at Warner Brothers where films were being cranked out one after another. They were contract players. It was one of the busiest studios in Hollywood. And everybody was kind of being rotated. I mean, Betty went off to do another film. Everybody went off immediately from one to the other. And at the time, of course, neither one of them knew they were making classic films.
Right.
They were showing up for work, doing their job, and moving on to their next job.
Right. And now Voyager, we all know that movie, but Irving Rapper, who directed it, is not as well known as someone like Michael Curtiz, who did Casablanca. So from your stories that you know, what was Irving Rapper like as a director?
Oh, I think he was probably a fine director. There weren't, I mean, I don't remember horrific stories about him like you hear about Michael Curtiz,
Yes.
which are legendary.
Yes.
You know, both my father and Betty Davis were the consummate professionals.
Yes.
Which meant they knew their lines, they knew everybody else's lines, they knew the logical moves, they knew the logical camera moves. They were truly skilled in their jobs.
Yes.
Betty certainly had a much longer career by then on film than my father did, but he still came with the integrity of, you don't show up late, you know your lines, you know what you're supposed to wear, you have an interaction with another actor and that other human being as a person, and so on and so forth. So the issue became that Betty and my father had definite ideas about who they were playing, who Charlotte and then Camille and Jerry were. And Irving Rapper wasn't necessarily agreeing with them.
Interesting.
So it became an awkward situation because, I mean, the director is supposed to be the guy in charge.
Right.
And Betty was certainly a force to be reckoned with by then on the Warner Brothers lot.
Yes.
But there were a couple of incidents where, you know, the big guns had to be brought in from the offices to calm things down.
And didn't Betty and your father then really start steering that ship? I mean, we've heard that the iconic cigarette scene came from the two of them versus Rapper. Is that true?
Well, okay. Again, this is one of those moments that has been argued a lot. It is in the script, as I believe it is in the book, that they do share a cigarette interaction. But the way it's written in the script, it was all cigarettes and hands and back and forth, and it was just too much. It was just too complicated a piece of business. But Irving Rapper was going to stick to it. That's what's written, therefore that's what we're going to do.
Right.
And my father at the end of the day was very frazzled and unhappy about the whole thing. And when he came home, apparently he explained to my mother, you know, it's a bad day at the office, and blah, blah, blah. Grumpy old dude comes home, and my mother says, describe it to me, and he describes it to her, he shows it to her in the script, and she says very casually, literally pillow talk, well, why don't you just do what we always do? Because they were both smokers, they both loved to drive sports cars, and from the time they were dating in their 20s, they would go on these road trips, and whoever was driving would ask for a cigarette. The navigator or passenger would take 2 cigarettes, light them, put one directly into the mouth of the driver, because the driver can't do that for him or herself. It was the most natural thing. So next day on the set, my father brought this piece of business to Betty's attention. She immediately loved it. She showed it to Irving Rapper, and he flew a fit and said, no, we're going to do it the way it's written, and that's that. And she literally picked up the phone and called Hal Wallace, brought Hal Wallace in, showed it to Hal Wallace. Hal Wallace loved it. Loved it so much that he had it put into the film more often, because it was only supposed to be at that one time.
Yes.
Shall we just have a cigarette on it?
Yes.
From then on, I think my father and Betty felt they had the support of the office.
They were great collaborators.
Yes, they
together.
were. They were great and great friends.
Yes.
Great friends.
And I would say that Orry-Kelly was also one of their collaborators. I've heard that Betty and he worked very closely together on the ensemble that she wears in that end cigarette scene.
Absolutely.
So what was your father's experience like working with Orry-Kelly?
He was brought to Warner Brothers because Betty had seen him in Joan of Paris, which was the first film he had made in the United States.
Yes.
With Michelle Morgan at RKO. And so they brought him to Warner's for a makeup and wardrobe test. And at the time, George Brent was a very big deal, and Betty had, of course, loved working with George Brent. So they put him in George Brent's padded suits, and they caked on the makeup and the brown lipstick and, you know, slicked back his hair and made him test like that. And Betty took one look at that and said, well, I'm not going to quote what Betty said, but you know she wasn't happy. And basically he said, do it again. I know that underneath all of that stuff is what this guy, Jerry, should really be. So luckily, they took the makeup off, they took him out of those ridiculous clothes and let him test again. Of course, there he was.
It's almost like A Star is Born.
It's almost A Star is Born, right. And then, of course, came the issue that my dad is very tall, and he's all arms and legs. And so they asked him, actually Orry-Kelly asked him to bring in some of his own suits to see what would work. And some of those are actually his own clothes. I think a couple pieces were made for him based on his suits. And his suits were all made by Anderson Shepherd in London. So they were all tailor-made and very George and Albert of England cuts, because that's who the tailor was for the royal family at the time.
Yes. And so then did Orry and your father go through those suits and then select for the scenes?
Yes,
then?
absolutely. And then what needed to be made, or in the case of a man's suit, built, they had built and tailored based on the combination of what Orry-Kelly saw and what my father brought in.
Oh, I see. Your wings are borrowed. Well, they suit you just the same.
The costume designers of old Hollywood I often call magicians, because I can't think of a single actress, Rita Hayworth, Ava Gardner, and so on. There isn't a single one that didn't benefit from the costume designer addressing some issue with the figure, and then of course helping establish their star style. So what were some of the challenges of dressing Betty?
Yes, Hilda, it's me.
You know, when you see her on the screen, you imagine this phenomenal presence. I mean, you don't imagine this. There is this phenomenal presence. So you imagine this sort of long, wonderful, tall lady. She, you know, was maybe barefooted, maybe 5'3". So certainly in the case of Orry-Kelly, who was a genius, a total master of magic making, needed to design everything that brought her a long look, that magnificent black gown with the cleavage, and then she puts the flowers to accentuate the length. You know, she walks down those stairs and comes into that room, and you swear that woman's 6 feet tall.
Hello, everybody.
That's total kudos to Orry-Kelly and his team.
Oh, you look simply gorgeous. I just love your dress.
Thank you, June.
One of the issues with her was she was short, small, but not petite. She had a larger upstairs than downstairs, and that was always an issue, because if you pick the girls up and show them off, you get a sexier approach to the character, and that's inappropriate for a lot of the characters she plays. She wasn't known for playing sexy parts or sex goddesses, heaven forbid. So the issue was always, how do you camouflage that look, or the fact that she was well endowed, without making her look too sexy or overdone. So that was something that Orry-Kelly had to deal with every time he dressed her. The first one that you see her in is Camille, the black suit with the white collar that forces the eye to come up down. It gives her length, it gives her height.
Yes, that first outfit of her makeover, the suit, when she's coming off the ship, from the toe to the top of her head, is one of those great moments on film.
Absolutely.
He was really a minimalist in his opinion. He knew that he was competing against other designers like Adrian and Travis Banton, who he said tended to put spangles on absolutely everything. And also that they wanted to assert their style voice rather than the star style voice. And to your point about the elongation, you know, there's that cream wool, deep, plunging evening gown that she wears.
I'm late, I know.
I hope you hadn't changed your mind.
Even wearing that cape. Now, do you know what color the cape was?
Yes, I do.
What color was the cape?
It's an orangey red.
Interesting.
It's quite magnificent.
Yes.
It's quite lovely.
Yes.
Where did you get that dress? Lisa and I bought it in New York today. It's outrageous.
Orry-Kelly said that he thought Bette Davis looked her most beautiful in this movie. Do you have a favorite ensemble of hers from Now Voyager?
I mean,
they're all
everything. I would take one of each.
Well, in the black V-neck gown, Narciso Rodriguez, I'll just say, paid homage to it at the Golden Globes for Jennifer Connelly, right down to the gardenias in the...
Which, oh, by the way,
yes,
are camellias.
Camellias. Oh, right. Of course they are.
And my father would send Betty camellias on her birthday.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, for years.
That's something that I think film fans love to hear about, because they look so close on screen.
Thank you.
The connection is so strong. Was it that strong off screen too?
Yeah. They were really friends.
Yeah.
And it did not exclude my mother I mean, the three of them would sit and laugh themselves silly in the living room. Lots of conversations I wasn't supposed to hear.
Yes.
And kind of didn't.
Yes.
You know, that thing about the kid on the banister looking down to the living, oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then what was it like for you to be in a movie with her directed by your father, Dead Ringer?
Actually, it was okay, because by then I had known her my entire life, so I was neither scared or particularly intimidated by her. She was just this lady who was in our house a lot.
Oh, thank you.
She was at my birthday parties, and I was at her birthday parties, and we spent Thanksgiving with her because we didn't do Thanksgiving, so it wasn't intimidating in that respect. It's just wonderful to work with a professional because you get so much, and she was very generous, but she was very generous with everybody as an actor. I'm not saying just with me. She was wonderful. I loved it.
Now voyagers sail thou forth to seek and find.
So now let's talk about Casablanca.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
Casablanca, many people consider the best movie ever made. Some people say it's second to something like Citizen Kane. Now, for the actors who were working on it, what was their day-to-day life? Were they thinking that this was the making of a legendary film?
I don't think so. Certainly, again, not based on conversations that went around our dinner table or whatever have you. No, they were there to do a job. Most of them were contract players at Warner Brothers. They got a script, they learned their lines, and they, went into makeup and wardrobe and showed up and did their job.
Here's looking at you, kid.
I think they did recognize to a certain extent that it had a historical element because it was about the Second World War, and they were shooting it during the Second World War, and it was about a place that was soon to be in the news and so on and so forth. So that, in a way, was an unusual thing. The other, of course, is that the vast majority of players on that film were actually also immigrants. So they had just personally gone through something very similar that their characters were going through in the film, my father included. He hadn't been gone from Europe very long at that time at all.
Right.
And did have a certain amount of that experience of needing to get out before it got awful.
What year did he first come to America, from London?
From London, yeah, 1940.
So it was very fresh.
Yeah, quite fresh, indeed.
And did he know Conrad Veidt?
He did, yeah, he did. And they were actually friends, so I love the confrontation when they're standing literally nose to each other, hating each other to the core, when they're actually very, very good friends.
I should like to discuss some matters arising from your presence on French soil.
This is hardly the time or the place.
Then we shall state another time and another place tomorrow at 10 in the prefect's office.
That's acting.
That is acting.
That's acting.
And then, of course, there's tons of stories about the script was not entirely written, that it was often a day-to-day process. What was your father's experience with that?
There was a script, there was an outline, there was a skeleton to the story and so on. But what was actually going to be said was not necessarily in print. You have to remember, this was all written by Americans.
Yes.
So this very American vernacular was being put in the mouths of these very, very European immigrants. And I think part of the reason why this film is so true and so popular is because there was an allowance for them to change their dialogue, not change what was being said, not change the intent. They were allowed to put it how they would have said it.
Liebchen, sweetness hat. What watch? 10 watts. Such much?
You will get along beautifully in America.
And in that, you get these wonderful, authentic performances that are barely performances. They're really something that's coming from the heart of the actor saying it. Not so much with my father and Victor Laszlo, because there were, of course, very specific things that had to be accomplished. But with the, shall we call them the ensemble players?
Yes.
The people sitting at the tables having conversations, and we would get bits and pieces of those conversations.
Yes.
And again, the authenticity of the ever-famous Marseillaise scene where eyes are glistening. They're glistening because they had just experienced the very thing that they are doing there on the set.
what was it like for your father and perhaps the ensemble actors working with Michael Curtiz?
Yeah. The three guys, let's call them that, my father and Mr. Bogart and Mr. Raines, they were appalled by Mr. Curtiz's behavior. And there were many times when my father and Bogey literally walked off the set. They would just go to their room and play chess for hours at a time, waiting for Curtiz either to calm down or to back off or whatever. Curtiz was temperamental.
Yes.
And he had no boundaries. If he was flaring up, he was flaring up. And his victims, his usual victims, were the crew and the background people, because they were the most vulnerable. They were the easiest to attack.
Right.
I think at one point, my father and Claude Rains and Bogart got together and decided sort of to challenge Mr. Curtiz.
I see.
And basically said, if you do that again, we're walking off the film. And which calmed him down, and he behaved well, I think, for 24 hours, my father said, and then flew off about something again. And my father and Bogey and Claude Rains actually did walk off the set. And it shook Michael Curtiz a bit, and he sort of got the point. And when they did come back, it was more a case of, now you have to apologize to the crew, and you have to, you know, buckle down and do it right. And apparently everything went quite smoothly until it came to the day when they were shooting the final scene, where the car pulls up and everybody gets out of the car, and then they have to hit a mark. So apparently whoever was driving the car didn't bring the car to the place where Curtiz wanted it placed, and so on and so forth, and had to do it 4 or 5 times, and Curtiz just lost it. And my father and Claude Rains and Bogart walked off the set and didn't come back for 5 days.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Wow. Because the car didn't hit its mark.
But he took it out on the crew, the ensemble. I mean, whoever was there, he just lost it.
Wow.
May I present Miss Ilzerant?
I was informed you were the most beautiful woman ever to visit Casablanca. That was a gross understatement.
You're very kind.
So let's talk about Ingrid Bergman and, of course, her wardrobe. And I joke all the time about it being nearly all white.
Yes.
We have the opening white gown, the white trench coat with the scarf, the white jumper with the French striped shirt under it. And I always think about, you know, they're on the run from the Nazis. She probably has one bag with her. And yet, there she is, looking perfectly pressed. Do you have a favorite ensemble of hers in Casablanca?
Actually, I like the one non-white outfit she wears, the print blouse with the dark skirt. I think that's very chic, very 1940s.
Yes.
I think everything else to me is a little over-the-top Hollywood. And I think that was the biggest issue with my father, too. He couldn't understand, why is this man who is being chased across the world, I mean, he's like put a target on his back. He's in white, he goes everywhere, he's in public. Why is he wearing this glaring ensemble?
Well, here's a great deal about Ricky in Casablanca. About Victor Laszlo everywhere.
He does look beautiful in those suits.
Oh, he just looks beautiful.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
He was 34 years old. He's supposed to be the older man, the more mature man, and of course he at that time was actually 34, whereas Bogey was actually, I think, 43. There's 9 years difference between the two. And the other issue that was really an issue at that time was that my father was over 6'3". Bergman was 5'9".
Yep.
And Bogey was 5'6". Not a tall person, shorter than Bergman and much shorter than my father, and they're supposed to be sort of heroic equals in their way. And as Bogey being promoted as the new leading man of Warner Brothers, they couldn't let him be too short. So there were actually lifts inside his shoes and then blocks built onto the outside of his shoes for scenes when he had to stand next to my father.
Wow.
Or if you watch the film quite a bit, you'll see that my father is leaning a lot or sitting in a chair a lot when he's with Bogey.
So how was that because it can't be easy to be working with a leading lady who's taller than you. What was that like?
Well, as far as I know, when she was with my father, she wore high heels, and when she was with Bogey, she was wearing flats, just to kind of level it out again.
Well, and I love that you bring up the paisley dress. At least it's paisley on
a blouse
top.
And
Good evening. Good evening. You see, here we are again.
Because that's something that might not work on Bette Davis, being that she was 5'3" and Ingrid Bergman was among the tallest actresses in Hollywood at 5'9".
I think she was 5'9", wasn't she?
She was. And Alexis Smith and Kay Francis were also 5'9". So they often found it very difficult. as Ingrid, I'm sure,
Yeah.
did to work with the other leading men.
Where is Rick?
All right, so earlier you brought up that so much of the cast were themselves emigres and that it was so fresh for them that this really was their real lives. There's S.K. Sakal, Peter Lorre, Leonid Kinski, Marcel Dalio, who is married to Madeleine LeBeau, who just recently passed away. How many of those actors and actresses do you think were able to see the impact that Casablanca had on audiences?
My guess would be probably not that many. Casablanca took a couple interesting waves of success. It was a success in the first place. When television came into reality, and as television evolved, they wanted more material. Not necessarily the big networks, but the smaller stations wanted more material and weren't in a position to produce material. So they went, someone said, wow, look, studios have motion pictures.
Wow.
Let's go ask if we can do that. And I think at the time there was probably no such word as licensing. It was just, can we rent that film and show it on a Monday night? And Casablanca was one of those. And I think the first true wave of popularity with Casablanca came because suddenly it was being seen everywhere across the country. It sort of built its own grassroots fan force. And by the time it got to its 50th anniversary,
He's looking at you, kid.
it had become visible enough that historians were looking at it as being something quite unique, not just for its time, but for all time. And again, if you think that so many of the actors who were in the film were not as young as my father, who was 34, but you look at the character players who were probably in their 50s, maybe some in their 60s, they would never have known that. They would never have seen that. My father died right before the release of the 50th anniversary, so he even didn't know the kind of success it had. He knew it was popular. He was always acknowledged as being Victor Laszlo. He was always invited to things because he was Victor Laszlo.
Right.
And that was of course very nice.
Right.
But he was more famous for lighting 2 cigarettes.
Interesting.
That's what people ask him to do. When a fan came up to him, it was always about the 2 cigarettes.
So it's now Voyager that he thought was his big legacy, and now it's more Casablanca. Fascinating. Fascinating. So on the subject of legacy, it's now up to people like us to carry on what's so important about these films and these actors.
Absolutely.
And you are, of course, doing your part, creating this incredible documentary on your father. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We've seen biographies of actors, and some of them very, very, very good and wonderful. But usually they focus on the film years, the film career that any one of these actors had. My father's life was in a lot of ways more heroic than Victor Laszlo and certainly more romantic than Jerry Durant's. So the story I want to tell is the story of a man who at a point in his life was a major motion picture star. But what went on around it, what he had to fight, what he had to deal with, were very human. It's stuff that could happen to any of us. So this is really the story of a man who, no matter what happened to him, found a way to get past it and continue with his passion for what he thought he could do, what he thought he could contribute as an artist. And the fact that he happened to have met and married the right woman. That's a pretty good story, too. They were together for 60 years.
So how can people help support this effort? How can they contribute to it and follow you on your journey through it?
Well, we have a little website, which simply is henreidbeyondlaszlo.com. And there's some stories on there. There's the reason why I'm doing it in the first place. There's a donate page, and I'm happy to say that a donation can be completely tax deductible. And then, of course, everything will be done and finished and ready to be seen and read and watched and cried through and applauded for, because 2017 is the 75th anniversary of now Voyager and Casablanca. And the 25th anniversary of my father's death. This is my gift to the fans and to him, I hope.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today and sharing these stories. You know I adore you.
My pleasure. I like you too.
All right, my dear, until next time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.